So welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes and challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this morning I'm delighted to have with us Peter Dixon, who's a director at Dudleys Consulting Engineer. So Peter, firstly, thank you for spending the time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and Dudleys to the audience, that would be great.
Morning, Chris. Thanks for having me and speaking to me today. I'm Peter Dixon, as you've said, and Dudleys. As a company, we are structural and civil consulting engineers. So that's one aspect, I suppose, of new buildings, new construction that goes up. So from our point of view, with what we do, everybody's generally familiar with the role an architect plays in a construction project. They're the ones that are seen and familiar, and they, I suppose, make the space and make it look pretty. And that's what most people are usually interested in. We are, I suppose, behind the architect generally, that we're always involved, but we, in simple terms, essentially, we design the skeleton of a building. We design what makes the building stand up. And then for the unseen things, from the civil engineering point of view, we make sure that the sewers and the drainage in the ground and the roads that are built all have somewhere to go to and tie in and connect to everything as they should do. So generally speaking, for our role, if it's going well, everybody just obliviously looks past it, they sees or appreciates what we do. It's all about what it looks like from what the architect produces.
Yep. Brilliant. So you do the real stuff underneath it. So they make it look pretty, but you make sure it stays standing for a very long time, I guess. Indeed,
that's what we like to think. We do the the real important stuff, but everybody's got their own role and the specialism.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. And if we start maybe talk a little bit about your background, how you got into business and why this particular one.
Yes, well, I suppose in terms of my background, I've got to say that from a younger age, I didn't really know what I wanted to do going through school, and even as a university, I was having this conversation actually with my dad not very long ago, in terms of he was a bit frustrated when I was going to university that I was saying, well, I don't really know what I want to do or what I'm going to be. There was an element of, I went to Leeds University for a course that was called architectural engineering, and it was a bit an amalgamation of lots of different subjects that kind of tied into some of the subjects I'd done at A-levels and what I was a bit interested in, that felt like it kept it reasonably open. That I did have, the only thing that sort of stuck with me was maybe architecture was something in terms of the drawing and what you see, that was something to go into. But then going through university, the actual architectural side of my degree, I really didn't like at all. It felt far too subjective, that you could go into a lecture and that the professor there might really like what you'd done and would wax lyrical and build it up and say it's brilliant. The next day, if it was a slightly different mood, it could absolutely slate you, and it felt like there was no right answer to it.
Yep.
So with that, then it sort of steered me more towards, I think, the mathematical things that are a fixed answer. And really, I wanted to become, I think from university, a building services engineer.
Yep.
And it was just upon finishing uni, I think I applied for a variety of slightly different roles, and structural engineer was one of the ones that I got an opportunity at through an interview. And then actually getting into the job and getting started with it, it felt so different to what I'd done at university. Because a bit ironically for where I am now, I think the structural engineering modules for university were probably the ones I did most poorly at.
Right.
But it feels, what you do at university is very theoretically based, whereas what you do in reality is far more of a judgment and interpersonal skills and things like that. As long as you've got common sense, you can get a long way with that. So those kind of things worked out well, really. That it's fortuitous, I suppose, in a lot of ways, that I am where I am, that I fell a little bit into a job that I like, and then it really developed from there. That I worked for a couple of good companies, got quite a bit of a mixture of experience across a lot of different sectors, and then being at Dudleys now for the last sort of 10 years, where I've just grown with the company as that's developed into the role I'm in now. And you look back and think, well, I would never, when I was a graduate coming out of university, I'd never have pictured myself in the position I'm in now.
No, I could say. What about even earlier? What did you have any sort of boyhood dreams of being something else?
I think beyond the standard things of very much liking trains and tractors and thinking like that, that my son now is adamant he's going to be a train driver. I think I was very similar to him at that age.
Cool.
That's life, isn't it?
It is interesting, isn't it? And it's so difficult. You were talking about not knowing, and I think it's, looking at, my kids and at 18, 19, 17, 18, it's very early, isn't it, in a life to even have any idea what we really want to be.
Well, definitely. I think you struggle as well because we're in a world now where there's so many niches and specialisms that
Yes.
try to really understand what a job and a role is. And that's very evident from what I've said about at university. What was defined as the structural engineering topics were a world away from what I feel actual structural engineering is and delivering that for clients and in the real world. But it's starting to change those things. I've had a little session down at the local primary school where they're getting parents in to talk about their jobs and what they do to try and share experience for the young students.
Brilliant. I mean, even, you say about college now, I mean, there's so many different types of courses that I'm sure weren't around when I went through college. I mean, really specific things like, printers. I think my daughter's boyfriend's been on a sports journalism course. Now, I don't even remember journalism being a course, but, the idea that it can be so specific is fascinating. And I think great as well, because I think it helps people find their real niche. If there is a passion for that sort of thing, then that makes sense. So looking back over the period, well, where you are now, but also historically, what would you say some of the biggest issues yourself and the businesses have had to overcome?
I think from mine and the business's point of view, the biggest issue I've sort of faced, without a doubt, has been kind of the recent times in COVID with it. And it was an interesting one that where COVID first came around, we'd all sat down when we were sending everybody to work from home and thinking about what it means for the business, that we were looking at the accounts and books and thinking, right, well, everything's stopping, workload could just drop off a cliff. What we're going to do with cash flow, how does that actually work out? What does it look like? And we tried to do a variety of different forecasts to understand what it might mean for us in the business and how we might deal with that. Then I suppose where we are, the industry we're in compared to maybe a services sector where your hospitality type thing, where their work did completely stop and there was no end to it. We thought it might, but actually following a little blip, a lot of what we did just carried on because people were doing things in the background that weren't necessarily site-based and they were pushing other schemes and plans. So that did keep going. The only, I suppose, biggest issue we noticed was the productivity kind of dropped off a bit. And I think where you saw a lot of stories at the time or over the last couple of years about people saying, well, everybody working from home, everything's rosy and brilliant because people at home, they don't have to commute. They are committing lots of hours and time to it. They may be even working more. And whilst I wouldn't say that we had any issues with people in our office or company kind of not working or putting in the effort, I think the thing that we suffered from a little bit that reflected in the numbers in terms of our accounts were the nature of what we do, in that it's quite collaborative, that there's never one answer to a building design or a drainage design. So the way we work in the office, I'll be walking around and I might be asking someone about a project or checking up or see something on somebody's screen and talk to them about it. And it's a bit more interactive. So rather than somebody going off down the wrong path, you're constantly keeping tabs and keeping things moving forward, which I think through working from home just drifted a bit. So then some of the rework time was there. But I think particularly from my point of view, the January of 2021 was the hardest sort of period I've ever been through. That was, I think, where we'd had the Christmas that was slightly getting back to normality. Yeah. There was a bit more mixing. And then everybody was geared back up for work and school. We all went in, I think, on the Monday. And then that night, Boris Johnson came up and said to everybody, well, actually, straight back into lockdown, no warning, the next day, that's it. So at that point, that's where there was, I think, the expectation to carry on working. And because that was the third time round, it felt like initially there was a lot of camaraderie and sympathy from clients and everybody else that, you know, this is strange times, running together. If something's a little bit delayed, it doesn't really matter. Whereas for that period, that all seemed to go out the window, that everybody was a bit fed up. It's kind of business as usual. You just got to get on and deliver. Yeah, then everybody's trying to deal with, oh, well, I've got the kids at home, they're trying to homeschool, I'm trying to work, My wife's trying to work. We can't rely on anybody else to help out. And that was very hard from a business point of view. But within that, I think because of what had been happening with COVID as well, within my family, and then a very close friend as well, there was some quite big mental health issues that were coming to the surface at that point. So that it all, I think, was one of those times where everything was a compound of lots of different influences of things that had come together, and it just felt like such a hard couple of months to get through that period, the likes of which, from my point of view, I suppose I've felt I've never had to deal with such stress and pressure before.
Yes.
It's just the way things work out, I think, sometimes, are how these different events or circumstances come together.
I mean, it was been a challenging time. It's a bit weird now looking back, isn't it? Because it's almost like we got through it, and at the time, you know, we'd say the first lockdown, there was a massive amount of fear just because we didn't know what you know, how long it would be and those things. But as you say, the second time, or that sort of significant second time, was very much oh heck, okay, this isn't over. This could be, you know, and as you say, just things like when you've got husband and wife working in the same house, it's like, can the broadband's fine in general, but can it sustain two people working? Is the environment capable of sustaining two people working on the phone? Just the whole thing was quite challenging.
And everybody was in such different circumstances, because there's lots of stories about saying, oh, everybody's in the same boat. But I think I saw something where it was much more, I think, apt in saying, well, we're all in the same storm, but we're in very different boats in terms of, if you're in a little dinghy or a big yacht or whatever,
Interesting.
it's very different, because we had it where, I suppose, I'm trying to help run the business and keep that going, so there's an element of pressure, but then we're dealing with a young family that couldn't really, whilst we were meant to be home schooling, that was hard because they couldn't just sit down and get on with work. So our experience was quite different to people that might have secondary school age children, where you probably say to your children, you've got to do that, go off and do it, and they're quiet, so you work. Or equally, people that don't have children or are just working and living on their own, that they don't have the distractions, but then they have the element of loneliness to deal with that others don't. It was so different.
So great. I love that. Yeah, you know, the phrase, the same storm but different boats, because my kids are teenagers, so they just got on and did what they did, and that was fine. And you're right, but at sort of, you know, younger kids, they do need guided learning and various things, don't they? So I can totally understand that. Goodness. So looking back again, what would you say you've learned about business specifically over the last few years?
I think in terms of the business, the key things there, I suppose, are keeping a very close eye on your finances, your cash flow, what you're doing there and how you're managing that. Because we as a business are relatively small, and we've always done things like that on quite an informal basis. So we, between directors, generally tend to have lots of informal discussions and chats about what money's in the bank account or what work we're on with and what our forecast is looking like.
Yep.
Never particularly had, so there's lots of breakdowns of spreadsheets that we kind of interrogate too much detail, because we're still very much hands-on in a lot of the work and the projects we do. So we have got that good grasp of things, which might change as the business grows, because that'll become more of a challenge to do. But at the minute, that's always worked well. And I think with the pressures of COVID and even the years before that, it's been something we're very mindful of, in terms of you've got to manage that you can pay your staff at the end of the month, and you've got to invoice accordingly to suit that.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I suppose it's just the challenges of people. For the office and the type of work we do, we provide a service of design and drawings that goes out the office. So it's not a manufacturing or anything like that. So the biggest asset we have is all the staff, making sure that they are working well, effective, or a happy team. And you go through, I suppose, ups and downs in that regard, COVID and things like that. So spanner in the works. But generally, we try and make sure that we are, I suppose, working well as a business, that it's a good environment for everybody to be working in, and we're working together collaboratively and positively. That I think we have got generally a good kind of ethos and attitude, and the way we work together as a team.
And just covering that, and obviously we talk about lockdown. Is everyone back in work full time, or have you have you what strategy have you got for working in or out of work?
So we have got, I suppose, policy now in place for working from home, but from my point of view, it feels like it works better in the office, and we're, I suppose, reasonably fortunate that we didn't have much of a conflict in that sense, that nearly everybody in the office was actually quite keen to get back to the office. And I've been on another course that was the Help to Grow, where you're chatting with other business leaders over the last kind of 12 months. And that's been interesting to see people in quite different sectors, but similar sort of size business and growing, and what their approach and attitude has been to the working from home. And for us, so it was obviously something we talked about a lot, but there wasn't too much pressure on it because most people wanted to be back in the office. So we were more concerned about managing the space and how we facilitate that safely, that we had a period of almost alternate working days to keep people separated, and then screens and things that's gradually drifted away. But I suppose I struggle with some other businesses that have almost gone down the working from home, where I think people are, if you're a person that's doing something that's almost like a very isolated task, we're always talking to other individuals within the office. But if it's something that you get a task and then you just go away and do it, I can kind of see why I would like to retain that working from home. So where I was talking to somebody that does software development, they were saying there's been so much pressure on their salaries and people wanted to work from home, they've had to go down that route. So nearly everybody is working from home. But then that's essentially meant that they've said they've stopped employing kind of graduates because they haven't really got the facilities and the means to train them properly. And then they were complaining about what that does to salaries. And you think, well, yeah, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot, really.
Yeah, interesting.
Because for us, when we've got a few graduates in the office, whilst you can, I suppose, train people remotely because there's teams and lots of means to do it, it doesn't work as well, because with a graduate, it's so much easier, or somebody that's inexperienced, to go over, be able to talk to them face to face, run through something, and have that more frequent interaction. Or for them as well, just here in the office, how two other people are speaking to each other about a project, what that dialogue is, or hearing me on the phone to somebody in a client, builds up what the typical things are, the way, the manner in which people resolve problems, all that kind of learning you'd almost take for granted, but once you're detached from the office, it's lost. I think that's definitely to the detriment of the sort of graduates that have come through in the last couple of years. I think that would be a big loss for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. My daughter, who's in university now and joined university in the middle of COVID, is, she's still doing a lot of remote lectures. And because the colleges have chosen to keep down that route, and it's difficult for someone that was obviously always in lectures together and sharing stuff to see how they can be as valuable. And it's very difficult. I guess the most important thing is we find a structure that fits the need of the organisation and the people within it to best suit it. But if we've got a collaborative organisation of people like that collaboration, then it is sensible we all get together on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, I think it probably, in some degrees, depends on the scale of your business and where you're at. That we've been small, we're growing, and we're probably in a threshold of needing some different structures if we grow much beyond where we are now. Where then, I think there's always the case for people to fall through the cracks, whereas very big companies probably have, on paper, better things set up in terms of like an intranet or options to talk to other people in different offices if it's quiet in your office and somebody's out. But actually, I think it's the reality of, with all the best intentions, these things don't often work as intended, because we've actually employed somebody over the past few months where we talked to them at the start of the year, and the way things had worked out, that we'd almost missed each other in terms of, well, there was an opportunity with us and they'd left somewhere but just taken an offer elsewhere. Yeah, well, that's what it is, and then let us know if anything changes. And bizarrely, within the space of them starting somewhere new, after 3 months, they got back in touch and said, actually, this isn't what I was sort of led to believe or what I thought it would be. So is there still an opportunity there with us?
Right.
That well for us, but that was all about a very big business that on paper is doing everything it should be, but the reality of this mixture of kind of hybrid working from home. They joined this company and they said they barely ever saw their senior managers. And when they were in the office, it was so quiet. They didn't feel like they were getting integrated in the company. They were just a bit too detached and they weren't developing. So it just wasn't working out. I think that almost highlighted, I suppose, our perspective on things, that you do need the face-to-face contact for a lot of things and to help people.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and it makes sense. And that's the challenge with growth is we don't have to change. And I think the key thing is our job as directors of organisations and leaders is to maintain the culture and the structure of a business as it grows, not allow it to change just by dint of growth. I think how many people have you got at the moment, Peter? Just a matter of interest.
There's about 25, isn't it?
25. Well, you might have seen this already. I mean, because we got to, my first business got to over 100, and I, in hindsight, looking back, I could see there was a point at round 20 when up to 20 you pretty much know everybody, you know their family, you know their friends, you probably even know their pets' names, and then you start to move to a point where you know them. Of the new people, you know them, and you might know a bit about them, but you start to lose that familiarity. And 50, you only know them. And you get to about 80 or so, and you sort of come into work and you go, well, who are they? And it's managing that process and that change. It's not a structural thing; it's more a cultural thing of accepting it to some extent. It's almost impossible to know everything about everybody in an organisation as it grows. That doesn't mean we can't do things to maintain the culture. And if by maintaining the culture we maintain the success, in my opinion, we don't have to change.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing to it, isn't it? It's the culture that. I think a lot of what we do as a business that has served us well and let us grow to the point we are at now, which has generally been a kind of organic growth without really going out there trying to fight to win work or overly promoting ourselves, that's on the basis of the service and the responses we give to clients as the directors, the leader of that. So then now where we're growing more, it's trying to make sure that we are bringing everybody on board within the company in terms of that general attitude and ethos we've got, that flows through, that you are being responsive and helpful to clients rather than saying, oh, well, that's not my issue, and back to them. We're here to be the problem solvers for whatever a client's trying to do. So keeping going and making sure everybody's on the same page in that sense is the key thing. And again, that comes back to, I think for me, a lot of the culture comes from the behaviours we as directors demonstrate to people. So then you only see that, or you see it more by being in and around those people. And
Yeah, I totally agree. And we often say life's a mirror. Our business is a reflection of ourselves, and therefore, but and I think while some organisations are successfully working with a much more remote working structure, not necessarily 100%, but sometimes 100%. One thing we talked a lot about, we did a lot of work with people through COVID because obviously we wanted to help as much as possible, was that we had to start to over communicate. And I think the same level of communication wasn't appropriate when people were remote. We had to do way more. And if we didn't, then we would see these cracks appearing, because people need to know what's going on. They need to feel I often used to say to people, just the way you would walk into a room would communicate something to other people about where the business was. And if I can't see you do that, I need some other form of mechanism to know where the business is, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, and I think we've seen it as an issue with where we deal with construction, and we deal a lot with people that might be in local authorities or statutory service providers and that kind of thing for planning and whatever else it may be, that it feels like there's almost been a bit of a changeover where you've got, I think because of cutbacks over a lot of years, there's a number of senior people that have left or aren't working as much. And then now increasingly, it feels like you're getting into the point of some responses from people that are potentially they've not got time because I think they're under pressure, but they've also not got, I think, that support and that background of either they've been dropped into something where there's been a lot of turnover of staff, so they're not too familiar and they're very fearful of making mistakes, or they're a bit more detached and they're working from home, so they're trying to respond to things, but then they don't necessarily have that person that's really readily contactable to back things up. So everything with those kind of processes feels like it's becoming increasingly hard for what we do and what we're trying to deliver.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. So you're probably aware we're a business coaching organisation. I'm keen to know who the best coach or coaches you've worked with have been, from whether it's a business, sport, or life in general.
I think for me, where that sort of question's almost getting to, do you have like a specific role model or somebody that you've to be or you follow from? And I've never really had that focus on a particular person from my point of view. That it's always been more, I feel like the way I've turned out, shaped me, has been almost bits of lots of people I've worked with. That at the first company I was at, there was a fantastic director that worked there that was such a brilliant kind of personable person, but so passionate about structural engineering, his job, that he was always so keen to kind of get into the design and the details, talk to you about it and pass on that knowledge he had, but then also really keen to sort of advocate, well, there's certain things he didn't know. So he'd pick up all the textbooks, look through it, learn it, read it, just love that side of things. So that kind of was the first person that really sort of fired me on. And then almost in the same place, there was an engineer that was technically the most kind of talented engineer I've ever worked with, that he knew things inside out. And for him, it was a hard process working with him because he held you to such a high standard, and was quite right. He was hammering you for it. But again, in that, where I didn't like it at the time, you look back and think, actually, that served me really well in a lot of ways. And so there's lots of things like that I think there's been so many different people I've worked with that have got certain characteristics that have really kind of instilled things into me and developed me and helped push me on. That it's then, I suppose, trying to do that yourself and pass things back to other people. That it's always been that constant evolution. And then the time at Dudleys, I feel like it's we are good engineers, but we're quite commercially minded as well. So that side of the business running has been more of the things that I've learned here and picked up on. And one of the directors that's sort of now he's working as a consultant where he's not in the practice anymore. That was the big drive for him, that it's you're working to provide a service to somebody, but everybody's in it. They want to make their profit and return. Likewise, we do. So you're trying to kind of do something as quickly as you can to maximize that return, but giving service. So it's always taking that balance that we've always, pushed those kind of things and try to make sure we do everything overall. You win some, you lose some on jobs in terms of the time, but you just keep delivering. So there's been lots of different people I've kind of looked at and worked with and thought, yeah, you know what, they've got the right attitude to life. And I think, you pick that up, and probably some things separately, as you say, not necessarily strictly work related. There's people that in my little group of friends where you've seen certain people that start to apply themselves to something, whether that be like a specific sport, where seeing friends that were doing triathlons kind of got me into that, to think, well, actually, that sounds like a good challenge, and kind of do it. And then there's different stages of that you can go through in terms of the distances and the effort that you're putting in to try and push yourself and challenge yourself.
Yep.
But it's always things.
Yeah, and as you say, I love to pull things from different people. As you said, it doesn't have to be one individual. It's pulling different techniques and different just ways of doing things, and that's okay. Have along that journey with those people or others, have you picked up any favorite quotes or sayings that you use a lot in business?
In terms of favorite quotes and sayings, I think there's a couple that probably spring to mind for me that I can't recall. One that I've sort of had in my mind for a while that I think probably came around more on becoming a director and the extra pressures that comes with, that it's what's the actual wording of the phrase? It's sort of worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. So there's so many people that will worry a situation to death and potentially play out lots of different scenarios, or it'll keep you up at night thinking, what am I going to do about that? And it's one of those things that I do worry about things, but more often than not, I'll get to that point of starting to worry about it, think about, I suppose, a few scenarios or outcomes, but then I can generally sort of almost get that mantra in my head and think, right, well, actually, worrying isn't going to change it. I just need to, the next day, get on, do this and this, and kind of move in a direction, move it forward. So that's That's one that's in my mind. And then another one that I heard quite recently actually was, I think it was from some podcast on a basketball player or something from America, that it was don't get bored of the basics. That I think for them, it was quite specific on, they were talking about the set training in terms of where they were an NBA superstar.
Yeah.
I think somebody was watching them and they were doing some really basic like footwork drills, saying, well, why are you doing that? You're this person, you should be just doing the really complicated things. It was like, well, actually, I'm only that good because I keep doing basic things and get good at it. So from my point of view, it's similar, I feel, in terms of whatever we're doing in the office. If I'm asking somebody to help me with a project or do a task, that is something that I would happily do myself, or I still do myself at certain degrees. So it's always those things of, you just have to keep on with everything that's got you to where you are. You keep doing those things.
Love it. Yeah, no, brilliant. I love both of those. And yeah, absolutely, that consistent practice is so key. I think the first one's really interesting. When I sort of do a lot of work with people around worry, fear, though, you know, obviously there's different stages, isn't there? And for me, if a feeling or a thought doesn't serve me, then thank you, but I'm not interested in it. And there's a stage of worry or concern that might energize us to get stuff done. But typically with most people, including myself, when you go too far on that spectrum, worry or fear or whatever it was called tends to be de-energizing. And that's the challenge, is that if it's going to not serve us, then it has no value. The thing about worry is, and whatever it might be called, is it's a belief that something's going to go wrong in the future. And the flip of that is a belief something's going to go right. And what's really fascinating, there's a guy I work with, and he says, which one would you really choose? If you could choose to feel it was going to go right or wrong, which one would you choose? And why not choose that one? I think that the tap on the shoulder to say, watch out, I think is so valuable. Watch out, that might go, there might be a problem here. But having acknowledged that and done something about it, the belief, I think Henry Ford said it the best, which I love, which is whether we think we can or think we can't, we're right.
Yes, whatever you think, you go forward with. And it's hard because I think some of it depends on your mindset. That even I have this discussion a lot with my wife, that she worries a lot about things, but then she struggles far more than I to be able to switch that off and work forward from it. So I think some of it is just almost that personality trait. So it's far harder to have, I think, that outlook on things and how you react to it. So you might almost get a group of people that can just readily not worry about things and carry on. And then I feel like I'm potentially in almost the middle band of saying, well, I'll worry, but then I can sort of take a step back and look at it and change my view, where I think other people just struggle far more to have that step back and change the way they're looking at something. But yeah, all those things as well. I think some of the best relationships I've built up with clients that we have quite often come from the really hard situations on projects.
Me too.
All right, things go wrong sometimes. And I think a lot of what defines you as a person is how you deal with that. So
completely agree.
Taking responsibility for things that you're faced with. It might not necessarily be your fault, but just accept it and deal with it. And if you work forward and you get to a solution in the end, those tough times, then you look back on, and that's kind of built good relationships.
I 100% agree. I think, looking back at my career, I think the best relationships, the most solid relationships I formed is when things went wrong, not when things are right. When things are right, they go, right, great, well, thank you very much, we like you. When things go wrong and you step up, and our clients see us stepping up and doing more than, going above and beyond, that's when they really come to respect and like us, because we've done what it took to help them get there. And even sometimes when it went wrong and it still stayed wrong, the fact that we stepped up to try and make it right stood us out, I think, from other people. So that makes a lot of sense. I'm interested, Peter, what would you say you've learned about yourself throughout your journey so far?
Learn about myself. I think I've learned that I am probably quite resilient, that I feel like, as I say, the sort of hardest times that I feel like I faced of that first few months of 2021.
Yes.
That felt like it was the point where there was some days where you think, there's too much going on. You want to shut yourself off, and you can see where people can struggle with mental health and how they deal with that. And I felt like at times through that, it came very much that things were almost coming to a head. But I think that of being able to try and step away from the little situation you're in and say, well, actually, there's so much that's going on that's good, family, whatever else it may be, and we're kind of in a good business, working well, that being able to almost stop, take yourself away, to have that resilience to things, to say, right, things are going to go wrong, but I'll keep on going and keep moving forward. So the resilience is probably the biggest thing. And I suppose it's just, how I've adapted as a person and trying to be, I suppose, the leader in the business, where, as I say, coming from something as starting out, the first few years I was working in a business as a structural engineer, civil engineer, thinking, well, how am I ever going to get to that point of the directors I'm working with then? They have all this knowledge, they deal with all these situations, and I think we're in a world where you've almost got instant gratification on so many things now, that becomes harder. I felt it was hard when I was at that point, that you almost wish your life away to a degree, to think, I want to be at that next step, and you're chasing something where you're probably not quite ready for it now. I think for people that are at that early stage in your career, everything's an instant win. So then it becomes much harder. They want to think that they can probably be that director or somebody more senior without having gone through some of the process that to get where I am now. It feels like it's all those people that have contributed to my worldview and influences on things, or also the projects that have been good, bad, how you deal with those gradually build you up to the person you are and how you deal with stress. So a lot of, the best lessons I've learned from project work myself have been where I've struggled. Sometimes that's been through the projects that have gone wrong, or equally where I've been out doing a triathlon or something like that, where I feel like you're partway through it and thinking, I'm completely drained and wiped out. I remember once doing, the first time I did a full distance triathlon, which is the kind of Olympic distance, that I was going and feeling pretty sort of shattered and run down partway through the end of the bike ride section on it. And I saw there was some lady in front of me that looked like she was in her 60s, and she was merrily going past me, and I'm thinking, right, she's probably a lot, but that shouldn't be the case. Here I am, far younger, and I'm slower, or she's going past me. That kind of thing, it gives you almost want that target to chase on, and right, that's going to be me. I'm not going to let her get away from me.
Yep. Wonderful. And come back to Dudleys. What's the future look like for you guys, and what challenges do you face, if any, would you say?
Well, everything's, I suppose, quite uncertain. We've gone through COVID. We've then coming out of that, and there's lots of worldwide issues in terms of shortages of materials because of that bounce back, but then issues of pressure in Ukraine that are putting huge pressure on price, availability of materials. And then now we're coming into this winter period where there's so much talk about energy prices and then the cost of living, and that ultimately is going to kind of factor in with interest rates about what's affordable for people and whether there's a recession or not that everybody's talking up at the minute. That for construction, we're always, I suppose, at the front end of that if there is a drop off in confidence, the projects that we're working on, or we think we're going to be working on, can quite quickly drop up and get put on hold. So then that's where we need to be keeping a close eye on managing cash flow and what we're looking at for workload and projects going forward, to try and keep ourselves as a viable business and keeping, I suppose, clients happy with delivering on what we could be doing. So then beyond that into the future, there'll be lots of things that are thrown at us that we can't foresee right now. We are still, I suppose, just by the nature of what we're doing and seemingly doing it well, we're growing naturally. So we've just taken, I suppose, the leap to open an office over in Manchester. Now that's not necessarily been a big fanfare of anything in terms of that we've actively said, right, we've put aside a big pot of money, we're going to almost fund that to a degree for a period of 12, 18 months to say, right, you've got certain people, you can make or break, you do that, and then it's gone. We've tried to, I suppose, do it a bit more where we've had somebody from the office that was wanting to move back over that way for family reasons. And then we thought, actually, that person has got a very good suppose, appreciation of the attitude of the company, the ethos that it has.
Right.
To try and say, well, we've got clients that work over that side of the Pennines and go over there quite a lot. So actually, it's not a big stretch for us to say, we'll set up a little base there. Somebody's going to be working there all the time. It'll give us a little place where other people from Leeds can go over if they're working on that side work, and it's a bit interconnected. And it then just gives us that opportunity to then grow from there. That at the minute, we are just talking about what that might mean for us in terms of where we've got a general business plan and there's some growth within that. It's how that factors into the Manchester office that's just started.
Yeah.
So there, I suppose that's the biggest thing for us in terms of we're just naturally still growing as a business, and this step over to Manchester is the first big push in that we've had.
Great.
So
Great.
how that works.
Yeah, no, I wish you very best of luck at that, and it's yeah, they can be quite challenging because it is, you know, the remote. You've got someone there, but that sort of remoteness of part of the business can come with its own challenges. But the benefits of being local to a bunch of clients is definitely one worth trying out, I think, which would be great. And just a few things before we close. What would you say, Peter, to anyone that was thinking of going into business right now?
In terms of going into business, it's got its good and its bad points, as does anything. That if you're going into a business and trying to set up your own business, it's going to be hard work. That there's a lot to put into it, and there's a lot more unseen things that if you're, I suppose, doing a job somewhere, generally speaking, you're just doing that job, and somebody else is dealing with lots of other things that go on in terms of the accounts, any marketing, management of things. That there's so much to do in the background that often you don't quite see. So that becomes the hard bit, that you want to set up a business, still do your job, but then there's a whole host of other things that come with it. And particularly at the start, when you're a smaller business, you don't tend to have that support staff or people that are dedicated to do that because there's not enough of it. So it's all on your shoulders. So I think that's the hard bit. Obviously, why a lot of people do it, because it gives you that freedom and the sense of ownership of something that drives you on a bit more to say, well, this is my little baby, my thing, that if whatever I put into it, you should get back from it. And is the good part of the freedom. And you can do, I suppose, as much or as little as you want. That potentially you might want to work all hours that there are in terms of growing a business, and that drives you on, or you might want to just work 3 days a week and almost do it a bit more, that you're not making the same money or the return, but you've got a far better balance in your work and life. I think whichever way you go, it's appreciating there's the good and bad, but then making sure you've got some kind of, I think you need a support network in some description, that whether it be family or maybe another business colleague or friends, that there's going to be those challenges or hard times. I think having somebody as a bit of a sounding board that you can talk to and work through some of those issues is a real key thing. So for us, where there's 3 directors, that works well almost internally for us, that a bit of that. But if you're doing something on your own, I can imagine it feeling very lonely if you haven't got somebody else to talk to about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it really can be, and that's, as you say, that's where support networks really come in, are really valuable.
And I think as well, you change your attitude. I've felt more now over the last several years where I've been a director, that where I came from a position of feeling I knew how everything should be done, or more definite on. But when I was underneath somebody and somebody was saying, oh, you should be doing this, that, and the other, you've almost got a bit of the benefit of hindsight if things go right or wrong. But I always felt at that point that I was a bit more definite in thinking, well, it should be done this way, or why isn't it being done like that? Whereas now, being in that position, you know what you want to do, but I feel like I question myself a lot more. Am I doing the right thing? Because it's all your decision or choice, that there's not somebody else.
I think the other thing that can be a challenge is, however we get into business, that running a business, being good at what we do isn't necessarily make us good at running a business of what we do, and also growing a business is different to running it, and it's understanding that these different skill sets need to be developed and honed over time are quite key to maintaining successful growth of any organization.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, and one final question. What would be the best advice you could give to an 18-year-old you if you could go back in time and do so?
An 18-year-old me. It's one of those things, you go back to an 18-year-old version of yourself, whatever you tell them, they probably won't listen because they know it all.
Yes.
I think I very much enjoy my job and my role and where I've got to now. And I think with that, I've always just tried to challenge myself and never had a set plan. So I think I wouldn't necessarily tell myself to do anything different because I don't think I've made any particular massive issues or changes. It's almost just don't worry about things as much, go along with it. Don't try and get to somewhere too early, kind of build yourself up steadily that things will come in good time. That it's not fretting about things or not thinking that there was a period where I'd gone through working initially, then become a chartered engineer, and then I was thinking, right, I need to be seeking out a promotion or going and doing something more. But I think at that point, that was probably too soon. So then it's just almost that advice to say, just stick with what you're generally going to do, but just try and not worry about it too much or not push too far. It will come in time.
Brilliant. Love it. Yeah, I think that's good advice at any time in life, isn't it? To some extent, it'll happen if you keep doing the things that are the right thing. Things will happen over time. They don't always happen in the timescales we would like them to happen on, but they will happen if we commit ourselves to consistent action.
Well, that's it. Yeah, the consistent action is constantly, I suppose, challenging yourself or pushing yourself. That necessarily have to be doing anything ridiculous, but as long as you are always that trying to move forward. So it's much like a business that if you just stick with what you're doing and do the same thing, you're probably going to struggle in the future because you're adapting to what clients want or changing technology and things like that. That it's all a constant evolution of yourself and learning to keep going with that. Yeah,
absolutely. Brilliant. Well, Peter, it's been really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today. It's really, really interesting. A lot of the insights that you've given us, and just if anybody would like wants to get in touch with yourself or with Dudleys, what's the best way to do so?
If anybody wants to get in touch, by all means, they can drop us a line on the phone or an email. That we've got the website that's out there, and there's the general kind of contact details. And if they wanted to either go through the email address or the phone, they can happily ask for me, and subject, I suppose, to being available, I can happily pick up or field any questions if there may be some.
Brilliant. Well, once again, thank you so much, Peter.
Yes, you're welcome. Thanks, Chris.